I live in a quiet suburb outside of Chicago, the kind of neighborhood where the only thing you ever worry about is a porch pirate stealing an Amazon package. Like everyone else on my block, I have a Ring camera installed at my front door. It usually just catches the mailman or a stray cat. But last Tuesday, at 2:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification that changed everything. Person detected at your front door. I was half asleep, reaching for my phone on the nightstand. I opened the app, expecting to see a thief or maybe a drunk neighbor. Instead, the screen showed a man standing perfectly still on my porch. He was wearing a dark delivery uniform and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was holding a large square box, but he wasn't looking at the door. He was staring straight down at his own feet. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. No one delivers packages at 2 in the morning. I tapped the microphone icon to tell him to leave, but before I could speak, the man moved. He didn't look up. He just leaned his head toward the doorbell. Then a voice came through my phone's speaker. It wasn't the voice of a delivery driver. It was my mother's voice. "Honey, open the door. I'm lost and it's so cold out here." My blood turned to ice. My mother passed away 3 years ago. I sat up in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. I watched the screen, paralyzed. The man on my porch started to tilt his head at an impossible angle, his neck snapping with a loud, wet crunch that the camera picked up perfectly. He spoke again, using my mother's exact pitch, her exact inflection, even the specific nickname she only used when I was a child. "Open the door, Tyler. I know you're awake. I can smell you." I grabbed the baseball bat I keep under my bed and crept toward the hallway. I didn't turn on the lights. I looked at my phone again. The driver was now inches away from the camera lens. The brim of his hat shifted, and for the first time I saw his face, or rather, I saw the lack of one. Under the hat, there were no eyes, no nose, just a smooth, pale expanse of skin that looked like wet clay. But where the mouth should have been, there was a jagged, vertical slit that was vibrating as it mimicked my mother's voice over and over again. "Open the door, open the door, open the door." Suddenly, the man stopped. He looked toward the corner of the porch, then turned his head back to the camera. His skin began to stretch and tear, and 2 solid black pits opened where his eyes should have been. They didn't reflect the infrared light. They were like holes in reality. I watched as he dropped the box. It didn't thud on the wood. It made a heavy squelching sound, like it was filled with raw meat. He leaned in so close, his black eyes filled the entire frame of my phone screen. He didn't blink. He just stared through the camera, directly into my soul. Then the feed cut to static. I stood in my dark hallway for 3 hours, clutching that bat, waiting for the sound of my front door splintering. It never happened. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to check the porch. The man was gone. There was no box, but right in front of my door, there was a single frosted patch on the wood, even though it was 60 degrees out. And pressed into the center of that frost was a single, perfect handprint. It wasn't the handprint of a man. It was small, delicate, and familiar. It was my mother's handprint. I've moved my bed into the living room now. I don't look at my phone notifications anymore, because I know that if I check that camera again, he won't be standing on the porch. He'll be standing right behind me, waiting for me to recognize the voice he's using next. I never thought my own voice would be the thing that keeps me up at night. I'm a sophomore in college, and last semester I finally moved into a single-room dorm. It was small, cramped, and the walls were paper-thin, but it was mine. To help deal with some insomnia, I started using one of those sleep-tracking apps, the kind that records sounds like snoring or sleep-talking so you can monitor your sleep quality. For the first few weeks, the recordings were boring, just the sound of the heater humming or me tossing and turning. But on the morning of October 12th, I woke up feeling more exhausted than usual. My limbs felt heavy, like I'd been running a marathon in my sleep. I opened the app and saw a recording from 3:12 a.m. labeled Heavy Activity, 12 minutes. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The first 2 minutes were silent. Then I heard a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a rhythmic, wet slapping sound, like bare, muddy feet walking slowly across the linoleum of my room. It started at the door and stopped right next to my bed. Then the breathing started. It was heavy, wet, and sounded like it was coming from a throat filled with fluid. But the worst part was when I heard myself speak. In the recording, my voice sounded deeper, more resonant. I wasn't mumbling. I was speaking a language I've never learned, a guttural, ancient-sounding tongue that felt heavy with age. It sounded like Aramaic or some old dialect of Arabic, spoken with a rhythmic, chanting cadence. After a few seconds of me chanting, a second voice answered. This voice didn't sound human. It was a low, vibrating growl that seemed to come from the very floorboards. It asked a question in that same ancient language. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. It was a command. Then my own voice replied in perfect, chilling English. "Is he still sleeping?" the growling voice asked. My own voice replied with a cold, detached calmness. "No, he's just acting. He's waiting for you to get closer." I dropped my phone. I remember that night. I remember being in a deep, dreamless sleep. I wasn't acting. I wasn't awake, but the recording didn't lie. I checked my Apple Watch data for that same time. My heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. Physically, my body was in a state of deep REM sleep, but my mouth was having a conversation with something that walked into my room through a locked door. I looked at the floor next to my bed. There were no muddy footprints. There was no sign of an intruder. But when I looked in the mirror, I noticed a small purple bruise on the side of my neck, exactly where someone would hold you if they were leaning over you, whispering into your ear. I deleted the app that morning, but it didn't stop the feeling of being watched. Now, every night before I go to bed, I tie a piece of thread to my toe and attach it to the bed frame. I need to know if I'm really the one in control of my body when the lights go out. Because lately, I've been waking up with the taste of old copper and desert sand in my mouth, and the thread is always, always untied. I'm 29. And for the last few years, I've made a side living by bidding on abandoned storage units. Most of the time, it's just junk, old mattresses, broken TVs, boxes of moth-eaten clothes. But sometimes you find a gem. That's what I thought when I cut the lock on Unit 402 in a dusty corner of a facility in Mesa, Arizona. The unit was filled with Middle Eastern antiques, brass lamps, heavy wooden chests, and rolled-up tapestries. But right in the center was the prize, a large, intricate rug. The patterns were swirling and hypnotic, colored in deep crimsons and midnight blues. It was the softest thing I'd ever felt, but it had a strange, heavy weight to it. I brought it home and laid it out in my living room. That night, the air in my house felt different. It was thick and smelled faintly of scorched wool and something iron-like. As I sat on the couch, I glanced down at the rug. In the dim light, the pattern seemed to pulse. It was subtle, like a slow breath. I told myself it was just the shadows. I woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of something dragging across my hardwood floor. I walked into the living room and found the rug had moved. It was no longer centered, it was bunched up against the wall, almost as if it had tried to climb it. I knelt down to straighten it, and that's when I felt the texture properly. My fingers brushed against a section where the yarn had come loose. It wasn't wool, it wasn't silk, it was coarse, long, and undeniably human. I pulled at a loose strand, and a 4-foot length of dark, oily human hair came away in my hand. My stomach lurched. I grabbed a flashlight and inspected the center of the rug. Woven into the very heart of the pattern was a face, a distorted, screaming face made of thousands of tiny silver hairs. It looked like it was trying to push through the surface of the floor. That's when I heard the whisper. It didn't come from the room, it came from inside the rug, a deep, vibrating hiss that sounded like a furnace being lit. In the Middle East, they tell stories of ifrits, powerful, vengeful jinn that are sometimes bound into objects as punishment. I realized then that I hadn't bought a rug, I had bought a cage. By the next morning, the patterns on the rug had started to bleed onto my walls. Dark, swirling marks appeared on the wallpaper, looking exactly like the weaves of the rug. I tried to roll it up and throw it out, but the hair gripped my hands. It felt like hundreds of tiny needles pricking my skin. I finally managed to drag it out to my driveway and douse it in lighter fluid. As the flames took hold, I didn't hear the sound of burning fabric. I heard a shriek, a high-pitched metallic scream that shattered the windows of my garage. The smoke was black and smelled like a crematorium. It's been a month since I burned that Unit 402 find, but the patterns on my walls haven't faded. In fact, they're growing, and every morning when I wake up, I find clumps of my own hair on my pillow, long, oily strands that are beginning to weave themselves together on my floorboards. I don't bid on storage units anymore, because some things aren't abandoned because people forgot them. They're abandoned because they're waiting for someone new to own them.